Okay, we still lack the most exacting knowledge about what Dasein is or how we should understand Dasein. We try to approach it more closely. Um, think of a halo of golden cloud out of which a fire is gathered. Um, and yet, in the light of that fire, the golden cloud must have first showed itself. Tracking, unveiling, being as though um, from this Greek privative of what is to be drawn out of the oblivion of Lethe. Is that how we should first think about this? We've got some comments or some discussion going in the Facebook comments on the last couple topics on techne and on language, especially. Um, so Heidegger has been taunting us with some of his most simple thoughts. Heidegger says somewhere that philosophy is so simple, but that's what makes it so difficult. I'll point out that generally speaking, um, we all have, and you do it every day. Well, maybe not every day, but you have often one has conversations like this where something isn't understood, and then the way we explain it is by drawing it into connection with something we already understand by saying, "Oh yeah, it's like that." Um, some of the most complex concepts in physics um, one can think of along those lines, um, although perhaps often misleadingly. Um, but in any case, by doing that, this regular feature of our thinking where we consider something to be explained when we compare it to something we're used to can be a problem that's hovering around the simple. Because we always think the simple is what we're trying to reduce things to. Um, and we feel like we've gotten there when we reduce it to something we understand. Um, that's one topic I think that can approach um, in Heidegger. I've been meaning to clear this up in other respects. Is the difference between um, simplicity and the lack of presuppositions as a movement towards Heidegger. I think Heidegger, in ordinary life, we do what I was just describing. We try to get to the simplicity, and then we consider the matter explained. Um, if we can get to something we're used to, then we're done. Um, Chinese language is extremely complex, for instance, and it'll take many years for us to learn it, say more than 1,000 hours of memorizing and study. But for a Chinese who already knows it, it's so simple that they can't even help but to be addressed by Chinese. They understand it, um, just as everyone understands their Muttersprache or mother tongue. Um, so uh, one side we have this rhetorical use, which is very popular in connection to um, the phrase Occam's razor. So in many of the remembering Nietzsche saying that the savants have merely condescended to themselves, meaning that quite a few presenters of physics, of all variety of scientific subject matter have been so reduced in their culture that they can only produce what amounts to popular entertainment instead of real communication of what's going on. Often they don't understand themselves what's going on, and they create all kinds of metaphors which mislead the public in many respects. But in that genre, I noticed that the misuse of Occam's razor is very prevalent, and people speak of elegant solutions as being simple solutions, and they also point to Occam's razor to say the simple thing is probably the right explanation, the true explanation. All this is, William of Ockham didn't say that. He wouldn't say it because it's totally vapid, because it's obvious that what's simple is totally dependent on the person and their level of understanding. But it's very powerful, of course. That usage is very powerful. But the other side is the side that we can see something of what Heidegger's doing and what philosophers mean when they speak of Occam's razor. Although, of course, with philosophers, most of them may not realize this either. But what Occam meant was the position with the least presuppositions ought to be preferred. So, for example, that Ptolemy presupposed that the number of stars which were visible to a good astronomer in his day around the time of I'm not sure what dates Ptolemy lived, but in any case, he was one of the head librarians at the Library of Alexandria. I think maybe in the 4th century AD, but maybe I'm wrong. He presupposed that the number of stars that were visible throughout the year were all the stars that there were. So from that, he saying there are about roughly the same amount of stars in the sky in one half of the year. In the other half, he concluded that the Earth was in the center of the universe. So that's an example of a presupposition, which at least perhaps he was unaware of it, so then it's a buried presupposition. But sometimes we're faced with making a choice like that simply because we don't know and we have to presuppose something. So I think in the extreme, the presupposition in Husserl is still the Cartesian doubt, which itself has elements of buried presupposition in the more even aware presupposition. Husserl says, I can't be wrong by taking the radical or ultimate doubt of Descartes, because Descartes declares that even if all this is a dream or an illusion, I still know that I'm the one that's subject to it, that it's true in some way. I think Heidegger wants to try to overcome this final, let's say, small complex of presuppositions. This is what he tries to do when he removes Bewusstsein. Notice that Bewusstsein has the, not just bewusst, which already means something like not accidental, but something done aware or deliberately. But Bewusstsein, which is usually translated as consciousness, and remembering that Husserl was supposedly scandalized by Heidegger's, according to Heidegger's telling in the maybe he exaggerates, I don't know, according to the testimony in the lecture book, which Agamben was present as a young man. if you want more details on this removal of consciousness from Husserl theme in carried out by Heidegger. Um, thinking of, but so in trying to find the ground of Dasein, we're also pushing around in this region of no presuppositions, or attempting to have no presuppositions, only that which we can grasp. Um, in connection to the comments, to the discussion on the Facebook page, um, it's not. I was thinking of the title of being in time, Sein und Zeit. So, and just like Greek and Latin are related, people say English and German are related. Um, but the question isn't that we can express the same things in the same language, or whether Zeit should have some connotation, which is still radically different than the connotations of the English time, uh, which is true with Aletheia, as against the word that the Latini use for time. But uh, rather, we're thinking of this question, like the question in Hegel of being children of our time rather than stepchildren, which then is developed differently by Boas and uh, uh, the guy at the LSE, the Malinowski, and then took over the whole of the anthropological thinking, which I think is best, most pithily expressed by Ruth Benedict when she says that culture is character writ large, or personality writ large. So we all have our own fingerprints, personalities, faces, and so on. Every culture as well, and they're all different. And according to Heidegger, it's also all, as it were, radically historical, or which means it's the same by the older meaning as accidental or finite. Um, so I was thinking of the French in Action series, even without any of the theory of Herder or anyone else. I noticed long ago in that series that what they were trying to bring out was that if you say bonjour in French and the things connected to it, the little kisses, or sometimes fake kisses which don't quite reach the cheeks, is something altogether different than an English gentleman with a bowler hat saying good day. Even if bonjour and good day could be correctly translated, there's only this slight silver needle of connection which makes them the same. Sameness, and what makes something the same, whether it's because they belong together, whether it's identity, which ultimately pushes into this principle of identity, which is the simplest of the rules of thought, or first philosophy of Aristotle, the beginnings of the rudiments of logic in its more clearly stated form, but not yet thought as merely formal logic, which Heidegger has to dig down to. I think that's one of the subject matter Heidegger is constantly taunting us with, is the sameness problem, as something almost like the essence of the concept. Remembering, I think the statement is fine in the Deleuze and Guattari book, where they say philosophy turns out to be about the concept. That there's a lot that goes a long way to Heidegger's view, because if you give a concept this very broad view, broad interpretation, broad vague interpretation, or allow it to cover a lot of ground, that becomes very much like what he's saying when he's denouncing the merely ontic thought. Um, so remember, it's being and time. So it constitutes a problem that we have two separate categories, even though Dasein has to always be within itself antagonistic, uh, but within itself. Um, Heidegger, in order to get closer to that, we can see that Heidegger says that Dasein is this only being that has existence for its essence. Um, and I think that's the place where if you set that statement directly beside different statements about what the essence of the animal called human being or meant to be, then you see some of what that would count as a presupposition, and then you get this finer view in Husserl, and that's still a presupposition. And you try to push the presuppositions out as much as possible. So I think what the existence uh, as essence has to be understood alongside these statements of what the essence of the human being was. So, like Aristotle says, the human being is capable of abstract thought, which amounts to be the same thing as thinking conceptually. This is the first step into metaphysics when it's thought as mathematical. I suppose as simple as it goes for everything: trees, halos, halos of golden cloud, whatever, justice, um, whatever you like. But I think the simplest example is the unit in mathematics, as I mentioned before. If you go from merely subitizing or um, garnering how many things you have right before you, which animals can do, um, which we can do without going into abstract thought. But if you go from that to the perfectly equal and always existing unit of math of the whole numbers, but of any unit of math, of any mathematical thinking, um, that you can go directly from 5 and then you can think of 95 immediately and there's no problem. This is a different world. Um, that's part of the rational, that's part of what sets human beings off from everything else that exists for Aristotle. Um, so you see right there that Aristotle is working within what exists and saying what's the peculiarity of the human being. He lists like 4 things, and then also um, willing and loving. Willing and loving are particular or singular in um, the sense of eros for the human being, I think. But actually, that's not the 4. Those he might ascribe to animals too. Sorry. What I was thinking of is the 4 particular things he describes as abstract thinking, the use of abstract thinking for prudential thought, um, the future, knowledge of the future as future, so we could hold future plans before ourselves, um, and the ability to draw inferences and do other things which connects to the abstract thought. It's interesting, if you look at some of Aristotle's books on animals, because you find out a lot of things like that. Aristotle thought that the spider had a techne. The spider making the web is techne. Um, Aristotle's opinions on animals is generally higher than it's usually thought to be. He allows that animals can be prudential in some sense, but not properly, because even though in some sense they anticipate and also they're capable of communication in some ways, of birds especially, of articulate speech, which is I think part of why I think the philosophic tradition before Aristotle informed some of this. Um, um, but I think that example of the spider as having techne and Aristotle understanding it that way is relevant to the whole technological essence. Um, when we ask what uh, it means, what is it? So existence is everything, right? But this existence is the technological essence. So, as it were, there's an essence of the essence. So, the current essence of the current Dasein must be technological essence, which is we can understand in somewhat closeness to the spider's web, but that would be the whole of the world, and we're in a way entranced in the work of it. Okay, we've gone over time, so of course there's much more to be sorted out.